Hi, this is Vatsa reporting from India, and this is VHDTV.
Yes, this is Hrudai from the US. How's it going there?
Things are not bad. Yesterday I overslept. I thought I will be falling sick, so I slept for a longer duration, but I feel much better.
That's actually very good. Sometimes to oversleep, it's actually good for your body to rest.
All right. So because I was sleeping, so it's a good thing that I overslept because I did not prepare, and now I can use a topic that's always in back of my mind. So I'm really fortunate to be part of this industry for more than 17 years or about 17 years. So today I'll be talking about semiconductor industry, where we do microchips, how it is done, why it needs to be done, so on and so forth. Okay, it's a large topic, so I'll try to keep it precise, simple, and yet try to convey what it actually means to actually create a chip. Okay, so hopefully you will appreciate the entire process. Okay, let's start with your mother, Amma. So when she is unhappy with either you or me, sometimes she just talks in binary language, either yes or no, right? So when she's
Yeah,
upset with us, so she says yes or no. That's it, right? There's no long conversation. That's
yeah,
almost like a switch. Like when you turn on the light, it is yes. When you turn it off, it is no, right?
yeah. I remember we've done the same thing, trying to talk in light language.
We had tried that once. So
Yeah,
I actually overate. The breakfast was really good, by the way. So so that is binary. That's a switch. So if you use two switches, so one switch you can have two states, yes and no. Let's say if I use two switches, in combination with those two switches, you can actually get four states. Okay, typically they use 0, 0, and 0, 1 as a notation. So it can be 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1, like four states. So it can be yes, no, maybe, I don't know, right? So now you're kind of forming keywords in a language. So the more switches you use, exponentially you can increase the depth in the language, the content in the language, right? Which
so if
means
you use like a million switches, it'll be actually probably as complicated as English or something like that.
as complex as any language. Yes, you're right. So because English is not a complicated thing, right? It's a very logical thing. It's just that it is complex. Languages are complex, not complicated, right? So you're right. Use millions or billions of switches, and you can actually make the most powerful logical entity, right? And that's basically the underlying fundamentals to make any semiconductor. So you write programs and everything in the software, but all these things has to be converted into these switches as a 0 and 1. So it's called as a binary system. So how does it all start, and what is the material that we use? The material that we use here is silica, right? So that is abundantly available. Sand is abundantly available, but it is always
Quartz.
sorry. Yeah,
Quartz, silica, quartz.
silica is quartz. Yeah, exactly. So the purified form. But then you take SiO2. It's like silicon dioxide is silica, right? Which means silicon atom is combined with oxygen. So we need to remove that. How to remove it? Basically, they take this SiO2 or quartz or silica, whatever you call, put it in a furnace, heat it with carbon. So what would happen?
So the go ahead.
Go ahead. I think you got it.
So the the carbon inside of the heat will latch on even better than the silicon, so that it'll take away all of the oxygen, because there's carbon dioxide and there's silicon dioxide. So then you'll be left with carbon dioxide in one thing, and then pure silicon in the other.
Yeah, when you say silicon, it is pure silicon. If you say silica, it is silicon dioxide. So silicon. Okay.
Silicon. So yeah.
So and the beauty in with silicon is there are something. I mean, I remember we had discussed valence band and the atomic structure some time back. Maybe we should do a separate video. I'll not go over the details, but silicon has 4 electrons in the valence band. By the way, when we say there is electricity, it's basically the flow of electrons in any given particle. So in the metal, it can move around very freely, but in the wood, it is not, because that's an insulator. Metal is a conductor. Semiconductor is something like it has a very, very minute tipping point. So you supply a very small electricity, then it becomes a conductor. If you don't do that, it becomes an insulator. So that behaves like a switch. So a slight voltage you provide, it becomes 1, which is an on. It turns on the system. You remove it, it becomes 0. So that's very important, because now you can give a very, very low voltage and start making switches like what we are using as light bulbs, because light bulbs needs 110 volts in United States, 220 in India. It's huge setup. You cannot keep it in on your palm and operate, right? Whereas this one,
that would be like, okay, this switch, this switch, this switch, this switch.
Exactly.
You get way too confused.
Not only that, also you need the power requirement will be enormously high. You need to have a huge powerhouse just to operate these switches, right? So if it is low power, that's the beauty. So you can actually think about applications that can fit on your palm or sometimes even in your earbud. Okay. So now we were talking about silica. Silica actually has that nature of 4. So it's neither ready to give away those electrons nor ready to accept 4 electrons, because it's exactly 4. So to make it complete, you need 8. Okay. So what we do is, there's something called a process called doping. Doping is adding an impurity. What did you say? It's pure silicon, right? It's in the purest form. But doping is adding some kind of another metal, okay, which has either 3 or 5 in the valence band. So there are metals like phosphorus, gallium, barium, arsenic. These are some of the atoms that can easily blend with silicon. So for millions of atoms, they actually add 1 impurity, 1 atom of phosphorus or 1 atom of barium, something like that, right? Or arsenic also. So when you do that, now you are making something disproportionate slightly. So you will have 1 or 2 free electrons for every million atoms, right? Because now there is a gap. So there is 1 extra electron that you have introduced, because the valence band had 5. So that 1 particular electron is ready to roam freely. So to move that 1 particular electron, you don't need much energy, right? That's how it is kind of becoming low power, and it's easy to switch it. So if you have to,
so it's just like a really wiggly tube. It just moves on its own. You don't have to move it.
Well, it's not like it's a good comparison. A better comparison is like something that doesn't have much resistance. You just push it, it just goes around.
Oh, like a superconductor.
No, it's not superconductor. No, you're mistaking. It's a mistake. So this is a semiconductor, right? So there is freely available electron. Okay, understand this. That can roam around. Okay, so because it is 1 electron and there is not much resistance, you need a very less voltage to move it. Okay, it's not that it is going to move all the electrons together, which means that conducts a lot of electrons. Okay, you just need that little bit of electron to just go, so that you can start treating as a switch. You stop giving that slight faint voltage, it stops executing, or it becomes 0 in other words.
So I understand now.
Okay, so it is not superconductor.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you have this semiconductor, you have created that silicon. So now it's almost like making bread loaf. So they call it as monocrystalline structure, but it's basically creating all the silicon attached to each other in a nice structure. And when you pull it, it almost comes like a cylindrical solid cylinder. Okay, it's called as ingot. It's circle. When you look at the cross section, it's just a circle. So that's called as wafer. So similar to a bread loaf, you cut it into slices. These ingots are chopped into thin slices. Each thin slice is called as a wafer. Okay, so it's mostly circular in nature. It can be 14 inch, 16 inch. Yeah, it's almost that thin. That's why it's called as wafer.
So basically the industry is kind of relating to foods, chips, wafers.
Wafers, right, exactly. I think it's all inspiring each other, I guess. So this is the wafer, thin slice of wafer. So now it has purest silicon, and then you start doping it with phosphorus. Yeah, so arsenic. It depends. Again, if you increase the electrons, it is N junction. If it is reduced that electrons, it is P junction. Let's not worry about that. So it's basically moving the electrons, right? Once you have that, it's like a process of etching. What is etching? Etching is simple, right? Take a wooden plank, put a stencil sticker, maybe draw something on the paper, take that and paste it on the wood, and start carving the places where the paper is not available, right? In other words, if I want to make S, you carve it in such a way that wherever the paper is not existing, you carve it, it becomes an S. So it's a process of etching.
You've made that once. I've seen it.
Yes. So yeah. So the etching is a normal process that we use in other places as well. So now we basically create that etching idea of etching on the silicon. So it is thin. You need laser beams and a lot of chemicals, whatnot, but the idea is still the same. You start creating layer after layer and making metals. So the wire connections is almost in such a way that it's all like a multi-story building. Let's say you have 11 stories. Every story can convey one wire or one particular layer of a wire. So you can create one on the other, right? On top of the, instead of having a long wire and making it big, you can actually keep it at different layers. It is still not connected. So the wire on the, let's say, 10th floor is not connected to the 11th floor. Okay. But it goes.
But with the switch, you can connect.
No. Let's not go there yet. The switches will be existing, let's say, in the ground floor. But these switches has to be connected. To connect that, the wiring should happen. So the wiring happens on first floor, second floor, whatever, right? So that's what is going to happen. Actually, again, in the US terminology, the wiring happens in the second floor and beyond. In the Indian thing, it's ground floor and first floor, but you get the point.
Yeah.
So that's how because there will be a lot of wires to connect these switches. Okay. So those metal wires happen in multi-story structure. Okay. So that now who is bringing the logic and creating that logic? We'll discuss about that now, right? So this is basically the mechanism. So on the disk, you will start creating these layers. You will probably end up creating 11 layers of stories or whatever. And then it's not like one disk will have one chip. You imagine that it's like your waffle, right? Where every box is like a chip. Okay. So sometimes you can have 1,000, 2,000 chips per wafer. Every box is a chip, and then you cut it open, and every square that you get from a wafer is a chip. Exactly.
A computer chip.
It can be a computer chip, cell phone chip, microcontroller, car chip, anything. Right? Anything that requires some kind of a logic should have a chip. Okay. Even a calculator has a chip. The drone has a chip. Everything has a chip. Even the washing machine, where there is a logic, there is a chip. Okay.
I've never thought about washing machines having.
Of course, because we have smart washing machines, right? So it can detect the weight of the cloth. It can check whether it is a gentle one or something that you need to put hot water, things like that. So it is all controlled. So those are all chips. So it's all over the place. Okay. But we'll talk about the more sophisticated chips at the end, which is called a system on chip. We'll talk about that. Okay. So we have these discs, we have those wafers. From wafers, you got the chips. Great. So how did we even come up with those design? So that's called as something called as pre-silicon activity. Silicon is right, something that happens while creating and manufacturing is post-silicon because it's happening after that. But before even doing that, it's called as pre-silicon. That's more or less the design, how to do it, right? It's something like constructing the house. When you're constructing the house, you're not jumping and start constructing. You're not putting the foundation.
You have to add the pillars and then add the.
Correct. Those are all.
And then,
no, you're missing one point. It's not.
You have to design it on paper.
Exactly. You have to design it on paper. So that's what is pre-silicon. You have to design it on the paper because it's more complex in nature. We do it on this computer. Okay. Yeah. So even in that, there are two main parts. One is front end and one is back end. Front end is where you tell what to do. Back end is where you tell how to do. For example, if I say only when A switch and B switch are turned on, turn on this bulb or turn on C. Okay, A is a variable, B is a variable, C is a variable, right? Only when A and B are on, C should be on, is a logic. So it is what to do. So it is
what to do.
It's
a logic. It needs a chip.
It is front end.
Front end.
Okay. And then the back end people will come and say that, you know what, how to do this. So I want the wire in, let's say, the third level or the fourth level, things like that, right?
So that's back end is like backstage, what you need to do, and then front end is on acting actually.
Exactly. So what to do and how to do.
So
right? Very good analogy. That's good. So that's what pretty much you do, and then basically we spoke about millions and billions of transistors or switches. So people literally create those switches. Obviously, they use some computer automation to do it because you need so many people to do 1 billion chip, 1 billion switches, right? It's not feasible.
Yeah.
So you create those logic, create that logic, and then once you are happy with that layout that is on the paper or here
on the
computer.
Yes, software.
You convert it into mask, which is nothing but a stencil, like you get the stencils, right? So that's basically used for etching on the silicon, right? So you do that, and now you know how to create the silicon. And again, similar to bread loaf, when you cut it, you see sometimes the bubbles are existing on the bread loaf, right? Which are like the deformities, right?
Yeah.
The same thing can happen even on the ingot. You cut it, there will be tiny bubbles, air bubbles, or deformities over there. So if you make a chip where there is an air bubble, it doesn't work. So it should be a state of the art kind of creating the ingot, right? Where you have to reduce those air bubbles, because people, even if there's an air bubble, we can eat the bread loaf, but the chip won't work. So you have to reduce those.
The chip.
It becomes a keychain. We used to make fun. All those failed parts can potentially become a keychain, right? Because the wires, tiny little wires, it's all microscopic, but to the naked eye, it almost looks like a hologram. So we were just making fun that all these things can be made as keychain and be sold on the market. But that's the process of making chip. Okay, so think about this. If you reduce the size of the switch, okay, then you can make the chip smaller. In other words, on one wafer, instead of making 500 chips, we can make 1,000 or 2,000 chips there.
Yeah.
Okay. So the smaller chip, it is better, and also the functionality becomes even more powerful. For example,
I remember computers were huge, and I think that was because it needed to hold a huge chip. But now we've reduced chips to the size of actual chips,
right?
Even smaller.
It's like very small. It's very small. It's in the matter of few square, right? So you have 20 square chips, right? Very tiny, and because it is tiny, the distance that needs to travel for the electron to travel from one point to another will become very small, because bigger chips has bigger transistor or switches, so the distance needs to be traveled is larger, so the power that is required might also increase, right? If it is
So
smaller, it is easier,
that's
so the power is also lower. And because the power is lower, I can use a small battery, and because it is a small battery, I can actually fit everything in a small earbud. So
and it goes on. You can make it smaller and smaller and smaller.
yeah, but you cannot make it smaller than an atom size.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a limit, and I think we are almost reaching towards limit. And by the way, whatever this smaller and smaller thing that we are talking about, it's called as Moore's law. You can go search on the Google. That's your assignment after this discussion. He actually predicted, and this happened many decades before, and we have been following his rule. I mean, he came up with the law, and the industry started believing it and actually focusing to meet that rule, right? So that's how we have made such a tremendous advancement. So today, most of the smartphones are actually powerful than most of the laptops, because you're putting so much transistor or switches or the logic inside it. It's becoming very powerful. It's handy. It has this much size battery, whereas for laptops it is this big, and computers takes the direct source from the power supply, right? So we have come a long way, in terms of these chips. Okay, so now let's talk about SoC, or system on chip. So the best example is a cell phone. The smartphone is a system on chip. Why? It is a complete system working together, right? It's well connected system, because on the you have a display, a beautiful display, you have a camera, you can record it, and again, when you're even doing a videotape, you can convert a colorful environment into a black and white. You have tried that, right?
Yeah.
Into a grayscale when you shot that short movie.
I love doing that. So taking photos in black and white.
Right. So that's something that processing is happening, and sometimes you can even take a portrait, like the foreground is crystal clear and the background becomes blurry. So all this processing happens with a display processor. And when you talk on the phone, even on the other end, if somebody is talking next to a lathe machine or some noisy environment, the noise cancels. So because there is an audio processor sitting inside it. So there's a lot of these the various processors that are working in tandem to give you the best possible experience. So that is called a system on chip. Even 4G, 5G, those modems are part of the system. Display processor, you get a great quality on the cell phone. That's a display processing unit. So you put all these separate processors together and connect a glue logic and make a chip, and that's called as a SoC, or a system on chip. Okay. Now, what's the future? We discussed that we cannot reduce that size smaller and smaller, so we have to be creative. So instead of doing layer by layer, one top of the other, how about doing circularly, right? Like this, right? So that's a technique that they are trying to do. And also, we started with the idea of a binary world, so 0 and 1. What if we have, so we are restricted with the logic. So one switch can only convey two things, 0 and 1. What if that one particular switch can convey more than two things, right? So that's where they are actually experimenting with quantum. So they are using quantum theory to see if they can achieve more states with one small switch. So that's probably the future you will be in. Go ahead. You had a question, I guess.
What I mean is it actually is something already that we are living in. So when you are saying switches, I'm pretty sure at least this might. So basically, there are multiple. You said there can be multiple switches multiple states on one switch.
Mm-hmm.
So in our house, in this house, you have those dimmer and making height. So there are practically different states even in one switch.
Perfect. So it's more analogous, right? But I think it's something similar. Again, I'm not an expert with quantum computers, but I think You got the analogy. You got the analogy right. I'm glad that you got the idea of a dimmer. So within one switch, you can have multiple stages. So and each stage can actually mean something, right? So that's excellent. So probably that's the future that you will be living in. And this is overall semiconductor in a nutshell. Did you like it?
One last.
Question? Okay, sure.
It was really interesting. I have one last thing. One day when I was reading on the latest scientific studies, I found that scientific discoveries. Sorry, I was reading that, and then I found something called Google made a huge quantum computer that could make a calculation in seconds that a normal computer would take years.
Yes. Yes. I think IBM has invested quite a bit on it. Again, I am not too familiar with that yet. Okay. Maybe in my lifetime, I will get to play with that as well. But let's see. But for sure, in you will probably witness it. If that experiment is successful, you will probably witness it. Okay. Did you like the topic? Any questions?
Oh, it was amazing. I learned so much today.
Yeah, and I'm glad that like I said, I'm very fortunate to part of this industry, and I'm learning these things as well as it's paying me as well. So this is good.
So two in one, really good. So you get knowledge and you get money.
And it's fun.
Yeah, it's I can imagine. I can imagine.
All right. Thanks for your time. Let's talk to you.
Thank
I'll
you.
talk to you
Go
tomorrow. Yes.
VHDTV.
Go VHDTV. Bye.